Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. Hey everybody, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast, or welcome back to it. I'm Allistair McCaw. In this episode of What It Takes, I have a 5-time Olympic rower, 4 times world champion, and 3 times Olympic silver medalist, Frances Houghton. Now, it's not every day you come across, never mind an Olympian, someone that's been to the Olympics once, but 5 times. That's 20 years of being at the very top of your game. It is incredible to have that type of work ethic, commitment, attitude is 100% champion-minded. I had a fascinating chat with Frances. We discussed her upbringing, how she got into rowing, which is pretty fascinating, pretty interesting as well. Also just going through her Olympic Games, from the first one, which was in Sydney, until the last one, which was in Rio, and her experiences through those Olympic Games. Guys, this was an amazing chat with Frances. I really enjoyed it, and I know you will too. She's also got a book, Learnings from 5 Olympics, so check that out as well. She's got a website, franceshoughton.co.uk. I hope you enjoyed this one. This is Frances Houghton. Hey Frances, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast.
Hi Alistair, great to have a chat. Thank you for asking me.
Well, first off, I don't think I've had a 5-time Olympian, 4-time world champion, and 3 silver medals in the Olympics on my podcast before, and I doubt it will be very easy to find another one.
Well, there aren't that many of us about, actually. I think I'm only the 5th woman in Britain to do it in any sport, so it was worth persevering to get over the line on that last one, that's for sure.
I mean, that is just astonishing. Never mind making 1 Olympics, which is just, beyond belief, but 5 Olympics. I mean, I can think of offhand of, I think 2 people. I think Steve Redgrave had 5 Olympics, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, yeah, 5 goals. 5 goals at 5 consecutive Olympics.
Insane. And then I think Leander Paes. He's an Indian tennis player. If I'm not wrong, he's going for his 6th, I think, which is just mind-boggling. But anyway, this is about you. Let's go back to where it all started for you in the early days.
Yeah. Well, can I just tell you a story? We just talked about those 5 games, and actually, it was coming back from my first games in Sydney that I made this vow to myself that I would persevere and try and be the first woman in Britain to get to 5 games in rowing. Because when I went to Sydney initially, I thought I just want to become an Olympian once. That would be amazing, just to be a part of the team. And when I returned, I remember I sat on a scooter coming back from lectures, because I'd taken a year out of studies to go to the games, and I resumed my studies when I came back, and it was that October, and it was like one of those drizzly October days in Britain, and I was just sat there, and I was sat at some traffic lights, and I just thought, oh my goodness, that was an amazing experience. I'd seen my teammates on the Olympic podium, I'd been a part of the team, I was still only 19, and I just thought, oh, how many more games could I possibly fit in before I'm too old? And that's when I decided, right, I'm gonna set myself this target for 16 years and see if I can get to that 5th game.
Amazing. We're definitely going to get onto that in this podcast because I'd love to take you through those 5 Olympics, or should I say, I'd like you to take me through those or share with us those 5 Olympics. But let's go back to where it started for you, Frances.
Yeah. So I was born and brought up in Oxford. Central England. I was actually born into a boarding house, so my parents ran a boarding house at a school in central Oxford, and I went on to be lucky enough to go to that school because it had a river running through its playing fields at the very bottom of the school grounds, and honestly, I was absolutely useless at every sport. And my sister was a couple of years older than me, and she was really sporty, and so me being sort of really quite tall, I'm now 6'4", obviously I wasn't 6'4" at the age of 11, but I was pretty tall for my age, and every time I turned up to a PE class, the teachers would say, "Oh, this is so exciting! You're going to be even better than your sister. You're going to be able to jump higher and run faster." And honestly, I know people say it often, "Oh, I was terrible at something," but I mean, I remember trying to run up the long jump run and not even making the sand. I was that terrible at sport. And so I thought, I'm so tired of being compared to my sister and sort of failing expectations. I'm going to try the only thing she hasn't tried, and that's sitting in a rowing boat. And that's where I found my own little world and absolutely loved it.
At what age was that, Frances?
So that was about age 9 or 10, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And why rowing? Was it because it was the only thing your sister wasn't doing, or was it? I mean, Oxford, obviously, we know traditionally, the Oxford-Cambridge race, which is, even if you don't know rowing or a little bit about it, that there's that race every year, the Oxford-Cambridge. But so obviously you were brought up in an environment where there was rowing, correct? Obviously, like Oxford.
Sure. The seed was in my brain. I'd seen it. It was tangible. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to give it a go. But the reason why I sort of turned to it was honestly to stop being compared to a very sporty older sister and to develop my own world. I'm quite an introvert, and I actually found that finding a sport where I was doing the same thing as other people, but it wasn't quite so interactive. It was fantastic because I was learning this sport kind of on my own at my own pace, and there were other people around, and I had the sport to talk to them about, but it wasn't a kind of the same sort of environment as being on a netball pitch or playing hockey. It was a sort of It was my introvert's paradise, really. I came to the teamwork side of it later on.
Tell me, you mentioned there you're 6'4", which is obviously incredibly tall. When did you have your growth spurt? Around about what age did you jump up a little bit higher than your classmates, for example?
Yeah, I mean, my mum always said we used to have a shop in the UK called Mother Care, which is for babies, and my mum says that I was just never small enough, so I must have been tall from just always very, very tall and long for my age. I remember at the age of 13, I was 6'1". I didn't really have a concept that I was taller than most. Than average, because I happened to be in a year when I was younger of classmates where there were 2 or 3 very tall boys. So even at the age of 10, 11, I didn't realise that I was a really tall girl. I was always tall.
Now, obviously, when you went for your first lesson with rowing, obviously the coaches must have been licking their lips thinking, right, because obviously the profile of a good rower is usually someone that's tall. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true, but you know what? The very first time I went into a rowing boat, it was funny because the rowing coach or teacher, he said to me, "Oh, you're going to find it a bit difficult because you're so tall. You're going to find it hard to balance the boat." And you're absolutely right. Great attribute for a rower to be tall. I think he saw me coming towards him maybe a little bit clumsy, a little bit of a reputation of not being the best coordinated child in the school, and thought, "Oh, this might not go as well as she hopes." So it's funny because I was almost put off initially, but I just liked being out there in my own world on the water, and I think that's what I got attached to, as opposed to any idea that I might be any good at it.
Interesting. Let's talk about when you were a junior. Did you have any coaches that made a big impact on you, or had a good influence on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those early coaches are so important. In fact, I often say, especially those junior coaches, they have such an impact on a young person's life. It's not just what impact can a coach have on a young athlete's career, it's what impact they have on a young person's life. And I think I was very lucky to be coached by some people who were really interested in developing me as a person and interested in what made me tick as a person, as opposed to simply training me. And I had some good fit coaches. So, for example, the one that took me through the junior ranks, he gave a very, very simple template to what a good rowing stroke is. And I remember that for the rest of my career, I would look back on that blueprint and think, that is something to keep returning to, that ruthless simplicity of a model to follow, whilst we're continually pursuing excellence and those 0.1% of improvement. I had this really clear template of what a good rowing stroke was, and I could see that not everyone had that. And so something clicked in my mind that he could see that that's something that I needed. And in fact, much later on in my career, towards the very end, I remember a coach saying to me, gosh, I've just realised that what you need is the same thing said to you over and over. And much as you love learning and more knowledge and improving, actually what really works for you is ruthless simplicity and sticking to it.
I absolutely love that term, ruthless simplicity. That's I think I might even call the show Ruthless Simplicity. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, if you could share in your experience, what were, maybe one or two things, and you already have touched on some of the qualities of a good coach, but maybe you could share with us maybe what one or two mistakes coaches make with junior athletes.
I think possibly seeing in front of them a line on their CV as opposed to, okay, what can we create together? This is exciting. I don't know what direction it's going to go in. And, it's a discovery. I think the mistake is to get too excited too early, perhaps, and try and steer the young person rather than help them explore for themselves and give them that space and broad space to experiment, to take risks, to get stuff wrong, especially when a young person is very talented. It's so tempting to go for those records and say, this is incredible, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. Mm-hmm. Whereas those early years are the absolute prime time for learning, for trying stuff out, for failing but being supported through that failure, so that you really do know yourself what works, so that when you go forward, you are so well equipped to know for yourself what will work.
I like that. At what age did you think to yourself, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this? What age did that dawn upon you where you thought, you know what, I could have a future in rowing?
I think there are various points in time. So, I remember at the age of 14 or 15, I held multiple records on the indoor rowing machine, and I actually, someone told me not that long ago actually that they'd looked back through the record books and I held sort of under 8 and under 9 and 10 British records for boys and girls, and I thought, oh, that should have been a moment that gave me a clue. But really at that stage I still had this mindset that surely, because I'm actually, I never saw myself as sporty. I thought, well, I've had this really amazing opportunity to start rowing younger than most girls. People, the other girls that start later on, they'll just overtake me. So I thought, well, I'll carry on as long as I enjoy it. And when people start to overtake me, or I don't enjoy it anymore, then that's when I'll sort of step aside like I sort of always have done. But I remember watching the Atlanta Olympics when I was 15, turning 16. And that was when I was at school and really starting to dedicate more time to my sport. And I remember having to make the choice between, playing more netball with my friends and going and practicing on the river on my own. And I think when I was forced to make that decision, I sort of realised, not necessarily that I was very good at it, but that it was really important to me to discover how good I could be.
Mm. Now, obviously, I'm looking at your website here, which is an excellent website, by the way, at franceshoughton.co.uk. So, for the listeners out there, head over to that website. Now, there's a very interesting line here where it says, "By the age of 16, I was hooked." And wrote on the back of a piece of card, "I vow to do everything I can get to Sydney 2000." Elaborate on that. Did you already had a vision at 16, so to say?
Yeah, so that was straight after the Atlanta Olympics, actually. And I was sat at we had a dinner in my rowing club, and someone who had previously been at my school came back from the Atlanta Olympics, and he just told us all about it. And he, in fact, had fallen ill just before the games and wasn't able to compete. But he still came back and told how incredible it had been to be a part of the team, to be representing his country, to have got to the pinnacle of his abilities in his sport. And that was when I took the menu card from the centre of the table, and I turned it over and I found a pen and I wrote on it, "I vow to do everything I possibly can to get to Sydney 2000. And I signed it, and I got another friend to come over and sign it and say, "Will you witness this for me? Because this is what I want to pursue now for the next 4 years." And I think now I look back on that moment now, I realise that it gave me an absolute clarity of the goal that I was aiming for, and therefore every day from that moment in that, I think it was September 1996, every decision I made was easily made because I knew I could set it against this goal. So am I going to go and which sport am I going to play, or what am I going to eat? It was like, well, which one of those is going to take me closer to getting in the team in Sydney?
That's an amazing story. You were obviously very self-driven, intrinsically motivated. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very, very much so, yeah.
I mean, you didn't need anybody to tell you, listen, kicking you out of bed and pushing you to do more practice and competition. That really came from you?
Yeah, I saw the task at hand, and I knew that it was going to be a hard task because in Sydney I would be very young to get into the team. But I learned musical instruments when I was younger. You had to be really disciplined about doing your practice. I remember at my school I had to. We all had these duties we had to do, and I was always the one that if my duty was giving out all the newspapers in the morning to around all the different girls in the house, I would be the one that would get up at 6 and just get it done because it was much easier when no one else was around. So yeah, I'm a morning person, and I really, I guess I see the end goal and I say, right, okay, if I've decided to go for it, then this is what's required, and I'm prepared to do that, and let's just go forward and get on with it.
Now, I mean, I've obviously had some experience on the rowing machine myself, and I must admit I've had, and I'm sure you've had many yourself, where there has to be a bucket placed next to the rowing machine when you're going, when you're trying to beat your personal best from the time before, and I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, but not the fondest memories.
I used to live in Amsterdam, and I'm sure you've probably rowed there at I think it's called Amstel Park. There's a rowing, what do you call it?
Yeah, lake.
Thank you.
Rowing lake venue. Yeah.
And I used to just sit there sometimes just watching the rowing. It's just so graceful. Also, I don't know if you've been to United States, but I used to live in Sarasota, Florida, where they built an incredible rowing venue there as well, with practice lanes, and it's all been man built. And I don't know, have you been there?
Unfortunately, the World Championships were in Sarasota in 2017, so the year after I retired, and I was like, oh no, I missed out on the one that would have been so amazing to go to and see that. So I know it was an incredible experience for everyone that was there. There was actually a wonderful rowing lake built in Sydney for the Olympics, and they put the Olympic rings there for everyone to see, and it was just absolutely wonderful to row on a lake that it actually almost trembled with the sort of the emotion of the occasion, especially with Steve Redgrave there winning his 5th Olympic gold medal. So I feel really lucky to have rowed on some incredible places.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. All right, let's go forward to obviously your professional career. You rowed for a total of 21 years, which is pretty amazing as well. That's a very, very long time at the top. But let's start with your Olympic journey. Your first Olympics, as you mentioned, was in Sydney 2000. And I'm actually referring to your website here again. That's franceshoughton.co.uk. And it says here, I came second to last in the women's double. Far from a low point, seeing teammates stand on the Olympic podium made me believe I could do that too.
Yeah. So, in fact, 6 weeks before the games, I was in the lead boat, the boat that actually went on to win a medal. But we weren't performing as well as we hoped, and they changed around the configuration of the crews, and I ended up in the crew that a team that we hadn't done any practice in. We had 6 weeks to sort of bring ourselves together, and I was so disappointed that I hadn't been able to have this full opportunity at the games. But I also knew how hard it had been from that moment 4 years before, at the age of 16, to say, I really want to try and get to these games, and that's everything that my life is focused on. I didn't want to waste the opportunity, so I sat myself down probably the day before I got on the plane to go to Sydney, and I said to myself, right, from the moment you step on those stairs to climb into that plane that's going to take you to Australia, it is positive thoughts from now on every single day. And I'm so glad I did that, because to be an Olympian is such an incredible achievement. And I say that because I've seen how hard every teammate I've ever been have the privilege to be with in Olympic Games. I've seen how hard they have worked just to get there, just to be awarded that place on the team. And I think it's such a shame in our pursuit of excellence and winning a medal or a personal best or fulfilling whatever potential we think we've had, to forget that achievement of getting to the start line. So we didn't do well. we did come second to last. It was pretty awful racing, but I did witness some incredible achievements by teammates. I knew I was as good as them because I'd actually won the Olympic trials that year. So to not be in one of the crews that went on to win an Olympic medal was really, really difficult. It was the first Olympic medal that women had ever won for Great Britain, and I wasn't in that team. And, that really could have destroyed me, and sort of made me think, I don't want to pursue this. But actually, I knew I was as good as them. And I thought, right, well, if you've won silver, that's incredible. But I absolutely 100% believe in myself that I can do that too. And in fact, I really believe that I could have added to that, and I believe that we could go on and we could win gold.
Amazing. Athens 2004, where my first Olympic medal. Going into the games, I wasn't sure if we would make the final, but we had prepared our performance to perfection. We peaked for racing, set the second fastest time ever recorded for the event in our heat, and won Olympic silver. My first senior international medal. How did that feel?
This crew was such an incredible crew. I look back and I think, wow, that was a real sporting privilege to be a part of that team. It was an interesting one because we were 4 introverts, and that, fortunately, we identified that early on. So we knew that we would have to make quite a proactive effort to make sure we were still communicating with each other, that we were still lifting each other, that we really understood where each other were at, because that energy that you get sometimes when you've got more, even just 1 or 2 extroverts in a team, that can really keep the energy up, and we didn't have that. But what we did have was an enormous amount of talent and really strong bonds. There's 3 of us who had gone through the junior ranks at the same time. We're very, very close. We knew each other very well. And a much older athlete who, she, instead of seeing us as a threat, these young athletes coming through, she took us under her wing. She was almost like more fun than the other 3 of us. We were so focused on trying to make sure that we got a medal. But what we did do is we worked really well together, and we constructed our performance piece by piece. And I think because we were intrinsically motivated, as you've already identified, we weren't trying to sort of show all our cards and show everyone how good we were, all the way through the season. We were just sort of quietly beavering away, knowing exactly what each part of our race should feel like. And I was actually, the girl that I sat behind was a girl called Rebecca Romero, who actually went on to change sports and win gold in Beijing in the individual pursuit in cycling. And whenever I sat behind her racing, I was blown away, because we would have prepared our performance, and then it doesn't often happen, and believe me, having a 21-year career, practiced and hundreds of races, it's not often that you're in the middle of a race and you realise that you're stitching together the very best of every bit that you've done in training back to back. And that's what we were able to do as a crew. And we didn't necessarily didn't feel like that was about to happen when we were in training, doing one bit and then refining it and sort of criticising it and, getting it better and better. But it had this, I don't want to use the word magic, but it felt magical. It's not what we were intending. The output was magic, but it was the method that we used meant that what we created when we calmly executed what we prepared was magical.
Mm. Let me ask you this before we go to Beijing 2008. Where did you get confidence from? Where did you find confidence?
Oh, so that's a really, really interesting question. So I was really challenged on this sort of midway through my career where I wasn't feeling confident. And someone said to me, I will not talk about confidence because it's a feeling and it waxes and wanes depending on the context, how well prepared you are, or, just what's going on around you. And he said, what you need to analyse how you felt when you've produced your best performances. When have you felt the most confident? Really take that apart. And I realised that for me, and everyone is different, but for me, a feeling of confidence comes through a fundamental belief in myself that I was capable, not necessarily that I would achieve what I wanted to achieve, but I was capable, I could do it, and that I had trust. When I performed at my best, I trusted the process that we decided upon, I trusted the people I was with, and I trusted the plan that we put together. So for me, I always came back after that to this formula in my head that said confidence is the two things I need for it to feel in place are trust and belief.
I like that. When in certain stages in your career, obviously in an athlete's career, you do, have highs and lows, and you do lose confidence. If you were to give some advice to athletes out there who are listening to this who have lost confidence, what would be maybe some of the steps they could take to, say, regain confidence again?
Yeah, I would do a similar thing. I'd really have a conversation and challenge. Let's try and park this word of confidence, because it does wax and wane. You can feel absolutely awesome and be hitting all the numbers, for a year, for a month, for a week, up to the day of performance. But because of the tricks that nerves play on us, on that actual day, they can just disappear in a puff of stroke. That feeling of confidence can disappear, no matter what the facts are. So I think it's really important to separate the facts and the emotion and really ask ourselves, okay, so when I have performed at my best, and that doesn't mean necessarily at the Olympic Games or on a high stage, just when I know that I've got everything out of myself that I've been capable of, what were the component parts of that? How did it feel? And then we can start to understand what it is for ourselves that we need to recreate that. But that first port of call up for me is to say, let's try and resist pursuing that feeling of confidence and let's call it something else. Let's really understand what it is, because confidence is really misleading.
Frances, I'm going to mention 3 words here, and I'd love to know your thoughts, what first comes to your mind when I say them. The first one is failure.
Yeah. Well, the first word that came to my head was success. And I don't know why. Failure is, I think it's because failure depends on the way that you look at it. I've got a saying that says, if there's a book of mistakes you need to make between where you are now and where you want to get to, keep turning the page. So for me, there is no such thing as failure, because when we were in Beijing, we failed to win gold in front of, I think it was 3 billion people. We were expected to win gold, and we didn't. But so much came from that for me. So much appreciation of what we did do well. So much appreciation of actually being in a crew that can survive that, and relationships that can survive that, and the self-reflection from after that was definitely the basis of things that came after. So failure really is in other people's eyes, and it doesn't, just like I say, success does not convey the internal lived experience. What you see on a TV screen, all those wonderful images, wonderful colours, smiling faces, that doesn't convey what it's taken to get there. And the same for failure. It may look like we had failed to win gold in Beijing, but that doesn't fully convey the internal lived experience of the things that we did do well, or things we did discover, and the adventure that we went on all the way through to that finish line.
Next word, pressure.
Pressure. Horrible. I went through a real journey of trying to sort of work out. I felt under a lot of pressure over my whole career. When I first started out in the sport, people could see that I was really tall, I was strong, I was able to move a rowing boat, and I was identified as someone that could possibly go on and be a part of gold medal winning crews. Perhaps we could get over the line and win gold for the first time. As I say, women had not won a gold medal at any point up until actually it was the London Games we first won gold, not by me. But I felt under an enormous pressure of my whole career to deliver this. And it wasn't until late on in my career where I said, you know what, it's not for me to deliver on other people's expectations. It's for me to do what I want to do with my career. Only then did I really manage to work with pressure and understand the things that it did give me the energy to do, rather than seeing it as a demand to deliver something that other people expected. I realised that pressure made me do things like make sure we sorted out any conflict, because I knew that the pressure was that there's a sense of urgency. The race is in 2 days. We need to make sure that everyone feels calm. So to think of it in a positive sense, I feel a pressure because I know I need to sort X, Y, Z out before we sit on the start line.
I had a fascinating conversation with a coach. It must have been about 2-3 months ago. And we spoke about pressure as well. And he just had the perfect line where he said, when pressure comes around, keep things simple. And I know, of course, you spoke about ruthless simplicity, but he was so right. With strategy, with thinking, just keep things simple. Because with pressure, we can just start to be, our emotions can take control of us. We can start to lose the plot, all these things. Our last word is nerves.
Yeah, well, that actually ties really nicely with the pressure one, actually, because when I knew that I was in the right place to perform, I knew I had a saying in my head was, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know what I'm going to do. And when I was in my last crew in 2016 at the Rio Olympic Games, I really tried to sort of emanate this sort of mantra to my crewmates and say, try not to focus on what might happen, focus on what you know you can do. So when you're in that warm-up zone, you're focusing on the strokes and the movements and what you know you can do, not letting that mind wander onto what might happen.
That's great advice. Let's head to your third Olympics. It was in Beijing 2008. And it says here, every day from the moment we stood on the podium in Athens was about winning gold in Beijing. We went into the games as 3 times reigning world champions and joint favourites, aiming to win the first ever gold for British women's rowing. We were leading the final with 150 metres to go, but were pipped to the gold medal by the home favourites, the Chinese. We had failed to win gold in front of millions of expectant spectators. I was proud of our performance. We had given it everything, or should I say, we had given it everything every day for 4 years, but the silver medal felt very different.
Yeah, so the difference between that silver medal in Athens and the silver medal in Beijing, and it was devastating, partly because one of the girls in my crew, she hadn't won a medal in Athens. It was her first games. So for her, it should have felt as good as it felt to us to win our first medal. But she was as bitterly disappointed as we were, and we felt so awful about that because, this was her, she should have been feeling absolutely brilliant, like we'd had an opportunity to feel. It was really, really tough. It was really tough to not win. But, it taught me lessons about that actually focusing on winning doesn't necessarily bring out your best performance. There was a lot of pressure in the lead up to the games in the year before on who would actually make the team, and I think that was really emotionally exhausting. So I think it was a really tricky time to handle. But at the same time, when you look at it really logically and pragmatically, we weren't the only ones who had sort of earmark on them that could possibly win. The Chinese were an outstanding crew. The Germans had never, ever lost that race in the history of the Olympic Games. They went on to win bronze. And I think it's really easy to see athletes that and think no one else could possibly be working as hard as them. But athletes all over the world, teams all over the world, are doing everything they can absolutely conceive of to be as good as they can possibly be. And in that sense, it's a level playing field, and the crew that beat us got more things right on the day than we did.
Yeah, it really just comes down to that moment, doesn't it? I mean, it's, as you say, you can be so well prepared, you can do all you can have your best race and still come second or still, obviously place down the list. London 2012.
Yeah.
Whilst others had the experience of a lifetime, London was a cycle of challenges for me. After seemingly endless injuries, I was struggling with form and we just couldn't seem to gel as a team. Less than half an hour after our teammates Heather Stanning and Helen Glover won the first gold for Team GB, we limped home in 6th place in our Olympic final. That must have been disappointing for you.
Yeah, I knew going into the games we weren't on form to win a medal, so I had my eyes wide open, and a bit like I was just saying about Beijing, and every crew works very hard. Even though my friends, my family were saying, you can turn it on for the games, bring out the magic, raise your game, anything's possible, it's the Olympic Games. I knew we didn't have the capability to win a medal. So I knew that going in. And 2 years before, actually, I'd had a sort of major hip operation, and I knew at that point that it was going to take me more than 2 years to reach my peak again. And so I was really looking to the Rio Games for when I might have another chance really at winning a medal. But as I've sort of referred to a few moments ago, London was where Great Britain won our first gold medals in women's rowing. And we won 3 of them, which is incredible. And it felt like the top of this pyramid where so many women in Britain have been working so hard for decades to try and get this first Olympic gold medal. And it was just wonderful to see Helen and Heather, who won the women's pair. They were the first gold medal for Great Britain across any sport at the London Games, and almost started the cascade of that Games. Obviously ended up going so well for the team. But also Catherine Granger and Anna Beddington, who won in the double. And Catherine had been in my boat in Beijing, and when we crossed the line in Beijing, my overriding memory is this groan of frustration that Catherine gave. We were sat there, we were exhausted, and we all knew that we couldn't turn back the clock 7 minutes, and that we would all have to wait another 4 years for our next opportunity to try and win that gold medal. And so to see Catherine win gold alongside Anna, who's just the most talented athlete, to see it, us as a nation and those individuals see the hard work pay off, and to see them on the centre of the podium at our home games was just fantastic, because I also knew that, like I had when I'd seen athletes stand on the podium in Sydney and think, I now believe that I can do that, I knew that this was the absolute beginning of the story for so many more athletes and female athletes in Great Britain to go on and believe that they could do that too.
You obviously mentioned you couldn't gel as a team. Now, you don't obviously have to go into details there, but how important is it for, there's four of you, how important is it for you to gel as a team, not only in the boat, but out of it too?
Yeah, it's really important, because it's a combination of personalities, not just ability. And I think when you're preparing for a performance where you need to know what each other's thinking without being able to say anything, because you've got no oxygen left in the middle of a race, and you need to be so neurally trained to do the same thing. So rowing, you're physically attached to each other, and any movement that is different to each other is going to take speed off the boat. So the levels of communication and common language, that's what you're spending a lot of your training time. Yes, in your training time you're getting fitter and you're technically improving, but actually what you're finding is this common language between you, so that when anything's said under pressure, you're in the middle of the race, everyone knows exactly what that means, and that you are so finely tuned to respond to those situations in the same way. And if you're not able, for whatever reason, to find that harmony in language or understanding, or even understanding each other as people, not just the performance, but the understanding of each other's personalities, so that you really can empathise with how they're feeling under pressure or the tension in the weeks before a race, and to be able to support each other and to be able to bring strength where there are other weaknesses. If you're not able to find that harmony, it can feel like really, really hard work.
Your final Olympics, Rio 2016, I had made it to my 5th Olympic Games, and only the 5th woman in sport to do it for Great Britain, which is phenomenal. And I was in one of the best teams I'd ever had the privilege to be part of. Sitting on the Olympic start line beneath the outstretched arms of the Christ of the Redeemer statue, I knew my whole career would be defined by the next 6 minutes.
Yeah, imagine that.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure
Well, exactly. Beijing hadn't gone well. London, I'd not been in one of the medal-winning boats, and I knew that we had the capability. We did have the capability to win a medal. We were sort of odds on to win the silver, and if we didn't deliver that, it could definitely be pinned on me for sort of being a common denominator in bringing things down, or that's what it felt like. So I knew that I was going to be retiring in 6.5 minutes' time, and that this result would be the story and the defining factor that would sort of continue to resonate long after I finished. But fortunately, in the years before Rio, I had realised that this incessant focus on winning and no stone unturned, that it was gold at all costs, I had realised that wasn't working for me. It was really difficult for my teammates around me. I wasn't fun to row with. It was making them feel tense, as well as sort of pushing myself too far, and I was kept getting injured. I was burnt out. And at that point, I had realised that, this was in 2014, that if I carried on with that mindset, I wasn't going to make the Olympic Games. I wasn't even going to make the team in Rio. And that was when I changed how I defined success from, it no longer is it just about winning gold. It's about what can I create together with my teammates. Because I knew that when I looked back on my best performances, that was the mindset I had had. It wasn't about we've got to win. It was what can we create together, and let's pit that against the best of whatever anyone else brings to the start line. that's what I was able to sit there underneath that Christ the Redeemer statue. It was about, I am absolutely committed to delivering what we have, that performance, that ultimate performance we've pieced together. And the thing that really made me stick to this, even when I was really tempted to just scream and shout, we need to go faster, was that I realised that the ultimate feeling for me that I was pursuing was to stand on the Olympic podium with my arms around my teammates and celebrate what we've created together and not be relieved that it was over. And I think certainly for me, if I was totally focused on winning, then I knew this from this focus on winning in Beijing. Even if we had won, I would have been relieved. I would have been relieved that we'd won, that we delivered what we should have delivered. And actually, I didn't want to feel like that. I had one last chance in Rio, and I really, really wanted it to feel different. I wanted it to feel joy, and I was adamant that whether or not we won a medal, that we would be proud of what we had created together as a group of people. So when I was sat there and I knew that my career would be defined over the next 6 minutes, it wasn't really, it didn't feel pressurized because I felt in control of it. And it was our creation, and it was for us to go out and fully express ourselves. And there was a moment in that race where we were actually lying sick. It was halfway. We were at the back of the field, and I thought, my goodness, this has all gone wrong again. It's all my fault, and I'm never going to be able to sort of speak to anyone in my sport ever again. I'm literally going to have to put my oar down when we get back to land and leave this Olympic park and leave this sport behind me. And I remembered in that moment, okay, but at least for the next 3 minutes, carry on doing what you've committed to do with your teammates. You know how you're going to row. You've got your process. You trust each other under pressure. Keep doing it. And lo and behold, that was when we stuck to what we had prepared, we started climbing back through the field. And actually only about 2 minutes later, it was us and the Americans at the front of the field, and we were closing down even on them. And I realised that actually sticking to this mindset, because there was so much trust between us as athletes, the 9 of us together, the 8 rowers and the cocks, we believed so full-heartedly in what we put together. We were so committed to each other, and not one of us going off and doing our own thing when we were lying sick. We were absolutely bound to each other and what we had created together, that sticking to that was what brought us through the field. And I realised, just as we were closing down on the Olympic champions, the Americans, that actually changing my mindset those 2 years before was, in that moment, taking me closer to gold than I could ever have envisaged. So it's a really powerful thing to know the right mindset for yourself. And it was something that I worked really, really hard to keep a hold of. And I remember when I was first allowed to be part of this team in about sort of January time in 2016. So we had about 6-8 months to bring ourselves together. I said to myself, right, you have physical ability and you have technical ability, but what else can I bring apart from that? Because that's going to be the deciding factor in my influence and what part I can play in this team, and trying to give that calmness to ensure that we thought right under pressure instead of this, we've got to win. Because winning, I think that focus can really pull each other apart, whereas this possession and this attachment to the thing that we create together is incredibly powerful.
Ownership, yeah. So after Rio 2016, you retired. Was it difficult, the transition from obviously 21 years of your life, getting up every morning at 5 a.m. and going to the lake? Was it difficult to transition into, let's call it, normal life?
Yeah, well, I definitely think I'm still transitioning. It's a very slow adaptation. I'm highly conditioned to a very structured, honestly very simple life. It is about this one goal, and I liken it to sort of getting up in the middle of the night and fumbling around in the dark to find the light switches. I used to know where every light switch was. I could, and I don't know if you find it in your own house, but when you're in the middle of the night, you can still get around because you know where everything is, and just sort of a pattern of knowing where every light switch is, and where the toilet seat is, and all that kind of thing. And I feel like the life outside of sport since then is this horrible inefficiency and not really knowing where anything is, and it's everything from the massive bigger picture of what am I going to do with my life now, what is my purpose, why am I here, why do I exist, to the smallest things like, well, what time should I set my alarm for, what should I eat, how should this conversation go. And that's been really, really tricky. I feel like an elastic band, those TheraBands that athletes do crab walks with.
Yes.
Quite often I think of those because I feel like I'm this elastic band that's been stretched, and I need to somehow keep filling that stretch, but without the challenge of trying to win the Olympics or the physical challenge of the training. So. But at the same time, I realise, I've just turned 40 this year. My body and mind won't do quite as much as it used to do. So it's this detraining and adaptation. But it's also exciting to be able to try different things and meet so many different people and learn so much from different people. That's just been absolutely wonderful.
If you could just name one thing you miss from your career, what would it be? I know there's probably many, but if you could just name one.
Yeah, the people.
The people.
It's the can-do people. It's the, right, girls, right, yeah, I'll do it.
Yep.
The depth of relationship and the honesty. I say, I've mentioned trust and belief, and actually the third sort of pillar that I really sort of honed in on, there was the trust, the belief, and then the honesty. And I say honesty is the gateway to all progress. Because when I looked back on the best teams that I was in, I realised they were the ones that were able to have really honest conversations. And I've realised since leaving sport that to have the relationship whereby you get to the point that you can be totally honest, whether it's been a good day or a bad day, or you're trying to improve, or actually where you're at is fine, but to be able to have that total honesty with absolute safety is really, really special. So I really miss the people. But since it wasn't the case after Sydney and Athens, but we now have WhatsApp groups, don't we? And so I can keep in touch with all the athletes that I rode with, especially more recently, and that is so great to be able to still feel a part and connected to the people that you went through such an experience with.
Mm. Are you still involved in the rowing in any capacity today?
Yeah, so I'm a mentor. I have set up a mentoring scheme within the British rowing setup. Just sort of started off with me whenever I had a spare day, I'd go back to the lake and to make myself available for any conversation that any athlete wanted to have. But we've now expanded that to make sure it's more formalised so that the athletes know when it's available, that they have access to other athletes, not just myself, but some incredible athletes from over the years, male and female and Paralympic, some that won gold, some that didn't win a medal, just to be able to cover all those different experiences. And that's been, I think, a really... it's just a really good thing to be able to make myself available, and hopefully I know how powerful it was for me to be able to have a conversation with someone who's sort of been in a similar situation, and for them to say, oh no, I felt like that too. Rather than an image. It's so easy to have an image of those that have gone before us, or people that we just see from the outside and think they've got it all sussed and it all went right. But to actually be able to have a conversation with them and understand what they went through to get there, and that it doesn't always go to plan, and we all go through so many different experiences to get where we want to get to, I think is really important.
Awesome. This has been awesome, Frances. But before we go, you've brought out a new book, Learnings from 5 Olympic Games. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, So I had all of these learnings in my head. I started making notes in the years before my final game because I really wanted to make sure that I passed on as much as I possibly could in the most constructive way possible to the last teams that hopefully I would be in. And so when I retired, I felt like it was almost like I had this notebook in my head that felt too valuable not to share. I couldn't let it just sort of waste away and fall into the recess of my memory. And so over the last 4 years, I've put these together, and I have constructed really chapter by chapter what went in for me into creating the ultimate race. People say it's a bit like stumbling across my notebook, and that's really what it is. Learnings from 5 Olympic Games, component part by component part. It's totally honest. It's a mixture of the pragmatic performance learning. So some things it's a bullet points, a bit like those sort of mantras under pressure, lots and lots of mantras and quotes that inspired me, things like that, as well as the really honest human story behind it all. So I've interwoven the pragmatic stuff with the stories, and hopefully that brings each of those component parts of performance to life and gives an example of when that really sort of came together. Unfortunately, that story of the last crew I was in, the women's 8, is a fantastic backdrop because it was the culmination of so much learning. We had many ups and downs. We were this incredible crew when we first came together, and then 2 athletes who were sort of higher ranked than us, they had this desire to be in our crew, so we were told, well, because they're higher ranked, we're going to disband you. So then we had to prove ourselves all over again, and actually it turned out that even though we were sort of lesser athletes, the way that we worked as a team proved that we were greater than the sum of our parts, and I'd never seen that almost kind of proven in data. We were then able to go to the games as the crew that we always had been, and we had this bond that we knew that actually it was always going to be about more than whatever happened in the end, because we were constructing something really special, and there were athletes in that crew who hadn't won, who'd been to 3 Olympic Games and not won a medal, and I was the only one that had won a medal before, and so I just knew how important it was that we got it right this last time, and so it was the culmination of so many different qualities. And actually just sort of five weeks before the games, we even lost our coach. He was diagnosed with cancer, and we had to change coaches, and we just had this sort of toing and froing and ups and downs, but what we ended up with was something that was almost beyond performance while still maintaining a focus on the performance and delivering it. So for me, it was the pragmatic learnings as well as this story that honestly just felt too valuable not to share and make available to others if that's something that they'd like to read. So yeah, it's all there through my website.
Well, I'm definitely ordering that book once we get off this call for sure. So I'm just looking at some of the testimonials there. I couldn't put the book down from front to back cover. I honestly believe this is one of the best books of this type I've read. Another one here, it's the best book on training for performance that I've read in 100 years, or should I say years? 100 pages of gold. Yeah, 100 years. That's 100 pages of gold. It just isn't good. It's masterful. The last chapter in particular is just brilliant. So no matter what sport you might be in, or should I say what field you may be in, business, whatever, this is definitely one book you've got to get. Available on Amazon or other?
No, I've self-published entirely myself. Okay. So it is only available through my website.
Gotcha.
I've actually done it all down here in Cornwall, working with local people. So I'm afraid it is only through my website. But that offers me the wonderful opportunity to be able to interact with people who are ordering it. And that's just been fantastic to hear their feedback and to continue the conversation. For me, this is the beginning of a conversation for people. It absolutely isn't a recipe, but it really does start us thinking and start that reflection to say, oh, right, what does this mean for me?
Excellent. Frances, thanks so much for sharing your incredible journey with us on the Champion Minded podcast. It's been a real honor. Before we go, if there's some listeners, followers out there that want to connect with you, what would be the best way?
Absolutely, through my website, www.franceshoughton, that's Frances with an E and HOUGHTON.co.uk, or on Instagram or Twitter, and that's at Houghton Frances for both of those.
Awesome stuff. Frances, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Allistair. Wonderful.
Well, there you have it, guys. What an awesome episode with Frances Houghton. I'm sure you are inspired as much as I am. Remember, this podcast is available on iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, and via my website, allistairmccaw.com. Connect with me on social media, on Twitter, at Allistair McCaw, on Facebook, Allistair McCaw page, and on Instagram, Be Champion Minded. So, until next time, remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion minded.